Okay, let's come on to this side of the antler, this big, this large antler here. I am going to come into part of it with a nice light layer of the cold grey one. Let's pop that in there. I'll pop a bit down this side as well. And on this little bit of the antler that's coming around here, I'm just looking for areas that are slightly bluer in tone. If you pick up a warm grey one and then you think after you've put it down, actually, you know, that might be cold grey one. I don't think it really matters here. Here, it's so sort of neutral, the antler. It's not really going to be the end of the world if you put a warm grey instead of a cold grey base layer down. I can see both colours coming through all the way down this antler. Now, I say I can see that. That's what I can see with the way my monitor's set up, or my, you know, tablet or my phone, whatever I'm using. Yours might be different, and so you know, there's a very good chance that you will see different colours to me anyway. So go with I mean, obviously you can follow the colours that I put and where I put them, but if you're seeing different colours from your monitor, then, you know, by all means go with that if that's what you want to do. The colours that I'm putting down, they're just the colours that I can see on my monitor. But if you're seeing different colours, go with what you're seeing, if you're happy to do that. If you want to just literally follow along colour for colour, well, then that's absolutely fine as well. But I wouldn't want you to think just because I can see, for instance, a cold grey tone and you're looking at your screen saying, no, I can definitely see warm, you know. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with what you're seeing. We all see colours differently for a start anyway. And secondly, we all have our monitors and our phones and our screens all set up differently. So where I haven't put the cold grey, I'm going to put the warm grey one now to get a base layer down. And as always, pressing on lightly and coming down in the direction that the antlers are going in. And by putting the colours and using the pencils in the directions that things are going in, that's going to help us make something look a little bit more realistic. Obviously, there are times when you just can't see any direction, and you'll know from, especially if you've followed along with other tutorials, I use the little circular motion. I'll just use it here. I use the little circular motion quite a lot. And as long as you can't see the circles at the end, as long as you can't see those pencil lines, as long as you've just got a nice even coverage, there's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely fine. What you don't want is to use the circles and then you've got sort of big circles. I'm going to come into this area here. I'm going to start to build up these colours now, and I'm coming into this little bit here with a bit of the olive brown 10%. I'm going to put that there. I could have used the brown ochre 10%. This has just got a little bit more green in, and I can see little bits of green coming through here. But if you've only got the brown ochre 10%, then go with that. If you've only got the raw umber would be another, the raw umber from the Luminance range, that is. The raw umber 10%. The raw umber from the Polychromos range is a much stronger, more sort of mustard colour. So I mean the raw umber from the Luminance. I'm going to come into this antler as well, where I can see bits of pink. There are little bits of like a peachy pink colour every now and again. And I'm going to use the burnt ochre 10% for that. So I'm just looking, really light pressure. I don't want to see these pencil lines at all. I just want nice light pressure and just start to build up some of the colours that I can see in this antler, taking the pencil in the direction that the antler's going in and using really, really light pressure so that the pencils blend together. Just bringing that around here. The next thing I'm going to do is go in, so we've just used the burnt ochre 10%, I'm going to go in with the burnt ochre 50% now and go over this 10% that we've just used, the burnt ochre 10%, with this burnt ochre 50% and just make these colours a little bit more intense. There we go, just put a little bit of that burnt ochre 50% in there. From here I'm going to move into the sepia 50%. It's the sepia 50% from the limbs. I always want to say dark sepia. That's why I just had to check it out, because I use the dark sepia a lot in the Polychromos. And I always want to say dark sepia 50%. But it's the sepia 50%. So let's move into that. Let's add a little bit of colour. And where I can see this slightly purple, it's brown, but it's just got that slightly red tone to it. A slightly purple sort of red tone to the brown. That's where I'm going in with this sepia 50%. I always think it is quite a purpley colour. And I'm just planning out the sort of form and the shape of the antler, really. That's all I'm doing. I'm just following where I can see this this browny purple colour, and that putting that in is starting to build the form of this antler. And bringing it all the way down behind this other one down here, and then again under here. Yeah, so that's plotted in a little bit of that area. I want to start to blend this and bring this together a bit more. So I'm going back in with the burnt ochre 50%, where I could see those slightly darker sort of peachy, orangey colours. And that'll also start to go, I'm sort of taking the pencil over that sepia 50% as well to help blend it a little bit. I'm just looking for a little bit of texture on the end there, not too much. I want to come in with a cold grey 5, just a darker cold grey. I mean, it could be a 6 really. I'm going to go with a 5 just to be on the safe side, because I always like to sort of go with the lightest pencil that I can, especially when I'm building an area up. So I'm trying to sort of, you know, build up form with the pencils. So I'll go, or usually I'll go for the sort of the lighter one. So because here I could have gone with a 5 or a 6. I'm just going to opt for the 5 to just see where that gets me, how far that gets me, because it's always easier to put more on than try and take whatever you've put on off. So if I find that this isn't dark enough for me, I know that I can go in with the cold grey 6, the Payne's grey, bit of the dark sepia from the Polychromos, and I probably will do all that. But I want to see where this can take me first. And that for me is a more controlled way to, you know, do what I want to do. And secondly, it's still sort of blending the pencils. It's getting rid of that grain without having to, with a lighter colour, without having to go sort of, you know, straight in with the darker pencils and trying to fill that grain in. Because once you've gone really dark, there's nowhere else to go. So it makes more sense for me, and you know, not everybody does this, this is just what I do, but it makes more sense for me to go sort of start with the lighter colour, so in this case the cold grey 5, and see where that takes me. It's filling in the grain, it's blending out the colours that I've put down as well, and then I can always go darker. I think the temptation can be with a small area like this antler, that, you know, you think, oh, I could get that done in no time. And I'll admit, I'll be honest, I actually didn't think that was going to take anywhere near as long as it did take me. I was quite surprised. I thought I'd have that done in a very short space of time. And I didn't. But I think, you know, the temptation is to say, right, well, I'll just go in with the one colour or a couple of colours and I'll get it all done. But you just won't build up those, the sort of form using the colours. You won't build up those colours in a nice, natural way. It does take time, even a small section takes time. That just works for my style though. I mean, you know, everybody's got a different way of putting pencils down. Everyone's got a different style. But for my style, building it up layer by layer, little at a time, just sort of suits it. But that's the lovely thing. There just is no right or wrong answer, you know. It's not science. It's just art, and you can just do what you want. Okay, so I've brought this grey in. Shape that a little bit. I'm going to go back in and blend it out now, and I'm going to use a little bit of the burnt ochre to blend out part of it. So where I can see the pinker bits are, I'm going to use the burnt ochre. Just lightly going over the darker colours as well to take those colours, blend them and bring them all together. And then I'm going to take the coal grey too and blend where I can see the colder parts. Take that coal grey too. And I'm just using this to blend out the areas that look colder, but I'm still going over and, you know, into the other areas that are next to it, just to blend it a little bit, just to blend and bring these areas together. So here, for instance, I'm still just sort of blending it into that pink, just to bring it together and blend it. And then just neaten that up around there. I'm going to come in with the Payne's grey, and obviously I want to be a little bit more conservative with where I put this Payne's grey. I want to use it to start to add some depth. I don't want to fill the areas with this dark grey, with the Payne's grey. As a very general rule, and I think I've said this before, unless you're building up a really solid colour, a really solid dark colour, as a general rule, whenever you go up through the layers, so you go from light to dark, every time your pencil gets darker, you are covering less surface area of your paper, of your area that you're putting the colour on. So here you can see that I'm sort of colouring in, or I'm adding the colour to less surface area. I'm just creating this shape. I'm only going to use the Payne's grey where I can see the darker bits, the sort of bluer bits, the colder bits. So under here, for instance, shape that around there. Just keeping that pencil really, really light. I'm just looking for where else I can see the slightly bluey bits. I can see a bit in there. Although, to be honest, I could have used the Coal Grey 6 down here now, actually. Just shape these antlers a little bit, add a bit of extra colour to these antlers on top, on the side. I want to go into this area down the side down here with this Venetian red. It's quite a pinky colour, but it's just got that little bit of brown in, and it's just a bit darker than the cinnamon. You could use the cinnamon if that's all you'd got, if you didn't have the Venetian red. Cinnamon from the Polychromos. cinnamon from the Polychromos would work. It's just a bit more intense. And in fact, this little bit down here, I am going to go in with the cinnamon. And again, if you didn't have the cinnamon, you're probably more likely to have the cinnamon than the Venetian red. But if you only had the Venetian red, then you could use the Venetian red there. It doesn't really matter. One's just a little bit more intense than the other one. Bring that down there. Going to come in with the Coal Grey 3 and blend this a little bit. Because I'm sort of softening out the edges of the pencil now, I have gone to the circular strokes. Because we put lots of light layers down, the pencil sits quite nicely on the surface of the paper. And that means that we can sort of push it around a little bit as we blend it, and that helps with the blending process. Rather than, pushing it down with a really hard pressure into the paper, that's not going to allow us to blend quite so easily. And blend this together. I'm going to go back with this dark sepia 50% as well. Bring a bit of this brown back in. And by this time now, I don't know about your antler, but by this time, because I've got all these layers down, this paper's getting smoother, and I can tell that these pencils are just gliding over a little bit easier. And that's because we've filled the grain in, or starting to fill the grain in. And as you fill the grain in, your surface just gets, the tooth of the paper, I mean, as you fill the tooth of the paper in. I always say the grain for the tooth. The reason I do that is because going back sort of 20 years, or, well, up till about probably 10 years ago, less than that actually, probably up to about 5 or 6 years ago, I used to have an art and craft shop, and we used to do lots and lots of card making, and we were always talking about the grain on the cardstock as to which way to fold the cardstock, because the paper and card, it has a grain. And you'll probably find that you can tear your paper much easier one way. If you tear your paper to create your portraits, I don't know if you tear it, but if you do, or tear it for any reason, you'll find that the grain tears easier in, or the paper tears easier in one way, and that's because you're tearing along the grain. And if you're tearing across the grain, it doesn't tear in a nice straight line. You get a jagged line. And so I always talk about grain, and I actually mean tooth, when you fill the tooth of the paper in. So let's just get this little bit in here. And then I'm just going to come around here. And again, I think this little bit might be a bit of velvet that's just sort of coming off the end of the antler. So I'm just going to put a little extra little bit in there. I'm going to go in with the warm grey one and blend this. Blend this together. Do that bit as well. And it's not a big area. We haven't been able to get too much pencil in, but at least it's... I'm just going to take that coal grey one and just go over the edge like we've done before. I don't want to go too far over the edge, just like I said before. I just want to soften that edge out a little bit. Just using little circular strokes to just diffuse the edge. All along the edge. And you don't, if you don't want to do this, don't feel you have to do this. It's not essential. I just want to diffuse my edges a little bit, but you know, it's not going to make that much of a difference if you decide that you don't want to do it. I'm just taking my coal grey one just ever so slightly past the edge, and I literally sort of like a millimetre past the edge. All I'm doing is rubbing it over the edge really to just diffuse it, but don't feel you have to. And I'm just using that burnt ochre just to brighten up those little bits again. And that bit, we'll call that bit done. I'm going to come on to this last bit of the antler here. And I'm going to use a bit of coal grey to get some base layer down. And under here, I'm going to come in with a bit of the brown ochre 10%. That's coming around there. That's his back there, isn't it? So there's a bit in there. That's pretty much it. Let's come in with a bit of the burnt ochre 10% in here. It's such a small area that I'm not going to get much in here, but I'm going to get a little bit of the burnt ochre in there. This bit here is shadow, so I'm just going to go straight in with the dark sepia, with the sepia 50%. And this has got shadow underneath a little bit. That sort of comes around there. And that bit comes around there as well. I should put some of that pencil. There's that shadow. I'm not going to be able to get too much in here at all, but there's definitely a bit of shadow coming down there. And that's darker under there. And then that carries on around this direction. It goes much darker and it goes sort of quite bluey grey in here. But I'll carry on with the dark sepia because I can still go over the top. I'm just plotting it. That goes up there. And then we come into this darker bit. But it's got some warm tones in it again, so I'm going to go in with the sepia 50%. I'm going to put some of the cinnamon in here actually. That's quite pink in there, so I'm going to go in with a bit of the cinnamon. And then that Venetian red again. It's quite a useful colour actually, this Venetian red. I do use it quite a lot. And you just want something a little bit darker than the cinnamon, or something, you know, with a bit more red or a bit sort of darker. I'm going to go back to this sepia 50% here. Under there. And I'm just shaping it up, that sort of curved diagonal. Taking that up that way as well. And then back with that burnt ochre 10% to blend that. And then in with the cold grey 5. Blend out this shadow. Bring that around there. A little bit that comes over there. I don't think I had that on the line drawing, but I've just put that in. Tiny little bit. Doesn't really matter. You go into the cold grey 3 here. I think it's 3. Yeah, cold grey 3. Blend that. I'm just going to blend that with a warm grey 3 up there. Bring that together. I'm going to come into this area underneath along here with the Payne's grey. I'm probably going to put some dark sepia over this as well to make it quite dark. I'm going to use a bit of the Payne's grey first, just a little bit. Again, start building this form. That's got a darker bit, this shadow. Slightly darker, put the bit of shadow behind this antler that's in front. And then that will obviously bring this antler forward. Same on this side. And then take that around. And I'm just going to go back in and blend this with the cold grey 1. It really is a tiny area. So the cold grey 1's just going to bring all this together for me. Under here. Blend over the top of there with the cold grey 1 because I can see a bit of the blue in there as well. And that's pretty much it for these antlers. I'm just going back in with a little bit of the sepia 50% just to put a tiny touch of the brown in there. I said that I was going to go in with a little bit of the sepia from the Polychromos, and I am. I'm just going to go in with a little bit of that here now just to add a tiny touch. Here we go. bit in this one on the top as well. Just a little bit. And that's the antlers pretty much done, pretty much there. So I think we'll leave those for the minute. I'm just going to go back over this little bit here actually with the olive brown. I've just lost a little bit of that green, so I'm just putting a bit of that green back in there. That's fine. So I think we'll leave those antlers there for the minute, and we'll start to come on to his body a little bit here. I'm going to come in with the warm grey one as a base layer in here. I'm going to come all the way up around past this eye. Thinking about the direction, obviously it's coming around the side of his face. I'm going to bring the warm grey around the side of this face. This goes much darker than up here. And I'm just getting a nice even coverage. I'm not worried too much about direction. In fact, we're not really going to see much direction in this bit on the back here now. It's really quite blurred. This will probably pick up speed a little bit now, this area, because we're coming into the bits that are a bit more diffused, a bit more sort of blurred. But I'm just going to take, obviously the fur would sort of start to come off at the back of the neck and down towards his rump. That's the direction that it would go in, down towards his back end. So that's the direction that I'm taking the pencil in, even though you can't really see much. I'll just work on that little bit for the minute. So I want to go with a little bit of the brown ochre 10%. Again, come down in that same direction. Not pressing on hard. The purpose of this is to sort of smooth out the warm grey one that went down, and start to fill in this grey a little bit, and also to tint it. We want that tint of the brown. But the reason that I went with the warm grey base layer and not just straight in with the brown ochre is because you can see I want it quite muted. I want that colour to be toned down, and so this warm grey one, I use it an awful lot. I think it's a super base layer, the warm grey one, at sort of tone, especially when you're working on animals, because with animals you very, very rarely have really, really bright colours. Obviously, you know, there are some birds that have very bright colours, and you could have some dogs or horses that have really bright red colour, or certainly bright ginger, bright orange. But on the whole, when you're working with animals, you want the tones to be quite sort of muted compared to when you're working with humans. You might want those colours, the skin colour, to be a little bit brighter. But for animals, you want them, you know, they tend to be more muted. And that warm grey one, I find, is a really good base layer for popping down under these sorts of browns. Obviously, if it was blues, I'd go with the coal grey, if I could see coal tones. But I find these, the the warm grey one really useful for sort of brown coats on animals. Okay, so I've got some of that brown ochre in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with the nugget and just start to add a little bit of this brown. Not everywhere, don't want to take away from this brown ochre in this warm grey one. I just want to start to think about a little bit of definition in the direction of the fur, really, because around here we can sort of see a little bit of definition. It's around the back end that it starts to go a little bit more blurry. So I've got these guides that they were on the line drawing if you've plotted them in. I'm going to use those. I should have, well, I mean, it didn't really matter that I didn't take them out with a pencil. I was just about to say I should have taken them out with a pencil. And if this area was all really light, I should have done. But as I'm going to go over these pencil lines with this nugget, you're not going to see them anyway. So and they're just going to give me a guide as to which sort of direction to put the pencil strokes in. But basically it's sort of coming it's almost like at a diagonal away from the head. And the nugget's just a nice neutral colour that works really nicely with the burnt ochre 10%. And if you didn't have the nugget, you could use a bit of bistre. Let me see if I can find the bistre. No, I haven't got my bistre. I thought I'd got my bistre here, but I haven't. But the bistre would work as well. Bistre's a little bit more sort of yellow. The nugget's a little bit more neutral. And then I'm just going to go in with a bit of the brown ochre 50% from the Luminance, and just where I can see that this sandy colour is a little bit more intense, pop that in. So I've just moved the camera a little bit and I'm just coming back with this nugget again and just bringing some of this over the top. And like I say, we're going to have little bits where we can see bits of texture, and then we're going to have bits where we can't see texture. It's going to go quite sort of diffused and muted. So I should probably go between the directional strokes for the fur and then some little circular strokes. But let's plot these in. Let's make sure these are nicely plotted in. I'm going to come into this area with the French grey 10%. And if you don't have the French grey, you can just go in with a warm grey too. But I'm just going to come in with the French grey and just very gently start to blend these colours together. I'm also going to use the buff titanium around here, just to blend this out a little bit. And I can just use the circular strokes to blend. Just as long as I'm pressing on lightly and I'm getting a nice even coverage, I can use those circular strokes. one thing that I do want to do, now I've put the back in a little bit, I've just lost a bit of the real sort of dark definition on the edge there. So I'm just bringing that back in on the bottom of that antler, just to make it come forward and to push the body back. And I'm going to use that burnt ochre 50% again, where I can see that this is slightly more sort of sandy coloured. And the key, I mean, the key to all colour pencil is to use light pressure, but you really do want to make sure you use light pressure here, because you don't want there to be lots of pencil strokes, lots of pencil lines, or it's just not going to look that diffused. We want this all nice and blurred and diffused, and it's not going to look that if you've got sort of lots of heavy pencil strokes, pencil lines in here. I'm going to come into this area over here with the raw umber 10% over the top of the warm grey one. And I'm just building up these sort of tones of really muted colours. This round here, this is, if I just sort of put a mark on there, that is obviously behind there is the leg, and this is all the tummy here. So that's sort of going to give you an idea as to where we are, because that's actually quite a big body to sort of work on all in one go. So this is just going to give you an idea as to where we are and where we're working. I'm coming back in again. I'm just going to do the body first, then I'll go on to the back leg. I'm coming in again with this warm grey one, and I'm going to come around here. And the other thing that I'm going to do around the back of this, where this tummy area meets the back leg, there's some cold grey in there, so I am going to put a bit of cold grey into that section. And down here. And then back in with the warm grey. And all we're really doing, I mean, I'm just building up. You can see that there's this sort of band of sort of the burnt ochre colour towards the middle. It obviously goes up into the nugget, and then I'm going to go up into some Van Dyke brown. And then we've got the bit underneath, which is also darker. So this bit across here, if I just mark that in, that bit across there is going to be sort of darker. I know we've got the white bit. That's going to be darker. This bit in the middle is going to be lighter with a bit of this burnt ochre colour. And then we're going to go up into the Van Dyke and the nugget. So that just gives you an idea as to where I'm and how I'm going to build this up. I do want to preserve. Let me just go around this mouth, because we do want to preserve that white on the end of that muzzle. So that I don't lose that, I'm going to put a bit of the warm grey one in, and I'm also going to put a bit of the brown ochre 10%, so that I keep that bit of muzzle there. That's obviously really important. I don't want to go over that. And as I take a little bit, I'm going to take a bit of nugget behind there in a bit. And that's going to put the sort of the depth in, the contrast, and push the muzzle forward. But let's come back to that in a second. Back to this warm grey one. I'm just getting a nice base in of this. This bit here, I'm going to come in with this brown ochre 10%. I said there was this sort of band around here, and it's just if you go between the tail and the muzzle, and you follow around in a bit of a curve around the body, that's where that band is of yellow, just about there. So that just gives you an idea as to how you can use landmarks to you know, put the colours and the values down. And I'm just using a circular stroke because there's nothing here that I can see, or very little that I can see in terms of direction. I could put a bit of detail on top at the end with a bit of brown, but on the whole I can't really see any direction. What I can see is a tiny little bit of the pink, so I'm going to put a little bit of in fact, I picked up the brown ochre 10%, but I'm actually going to change my mind. I'm actually going to put a bit of the burnt sienna 10% because it's just slightly more muted and not so peachy. So I'm just going to use a little bit. Now, if you're going to go with circular strokes like me, you've got to make sure that you don't have any pencil strokes showing. Otherwise, we're going to have to go like this, down like this. Either way, we don't really want any pencil strokes showing. And I'm just going to blend that out there. Bring it all the way down as well, actually. A bit more grey down the bottom, but I can still see that there's some pink in there. And I mean, he does have the most gorgeous colours in his coat. Really pretty colours. You can just sort of imagine how thick that that coat is. Our own horses here are, I mean, we're into November and they are, they're really growing their winter coats now. And we don't have temperature anywhere near like these reindeer do, so you can imagine how thick their coat would be. I'm just going to put a bit of the burnt ochre 10% up here. Goes a bit more peachy. And again, I'm using the circular strokes because I'm confident that I can put the circular strokes down and I'm not going to get any circles showing on the page. But if that's something that you're still sort of working on, go with the directional strokes like this. That's up to you. Whatever works for you. I'll go back over this bit with the warm grey one and blend that. I'm going to come under here with the coal grey one. It's going to go brown, but I can also see the highlights have just got a touch of blue to them. So I'm just going to put the coal grey one under here because obviously we work light to dark. take that along there. And then I'm going to come under here with this warm grey one again. So we've got the base plotted in, and it's been quite a quick process really, because we're working quite muted with not too much detail now. We will be able to sort of complete this area a little bit faster. A lot of the detail has already been done now in the face and the antlers. I'm going to come under the side of this. So this band that I said was the darker band around here, I'm going to come under this with some of the nugget. And I am coming into the directional strokes because obviously you can see some direction here, still quite muted. So whilst I put a little bit more definition in them here at the front, at the back now, I'm just going to release the pressure. There wasn't much pressure there, but I'm just going to release the pressure off even more. There's a slightly darker bit down there. And it comes around the underside of this arm. Get this texture in where it meets this lighter area. And then underneath, some of this definition comes back this way in itself. I can see some coming back this way. Curves around under this body. So I've just kept that really, really light under there. I'm going to go from this colour at the minute. I'm just going to come into a bit of this brown ochre 10% again. Blend that. I'm just going to get this little pencil line on the bottom, because that is going to be a nice light soft area, so I don't want that pencil line in there, but I do want to get a bit of the brown ochre into here, and I can blend up into this nugget. And put a little bit of that down there. Right on the bottom down here, so we've got this bit that's coming down here that's cold grey here, so I'm going to pop that in, and then we've also got this bit underneath. Comes into the cold grey underneath here. And I'm just going to blend that under there as well with a little bit of the warm grey too. I want to come into this area with the Van Dyke brown over the bit where we've put the nugget. I'm going to go in with these directional strokes behind this leg. Curves around this tummy again. So I'm just going to very gently curve it around on the bottom. I'm going to blend this underneath with the buff titanium and just feather that into that buff titanium on the bottom underneath. And again, there are areas that it just is easier for me to just go into circular strokes because there's very little definition under here. Lost a little bit of that brown ochre 10%, so I'm just going to pop a little bit of that back in. And I'm just going to come under here again with a coal grey 3 to just darken this down a little bit. It doesn't need much, it just needs that extra bit of sort of definition under the tummy. Just a little bit. And then just softening with the coal grey 1. I'm going to make that darker. I'm going to go into that with some darker browns and with some darker grey. But what I'm going to do and to start with is bring these browns in on top, and then I can work out how dark to take that. So I'll bring these browns in up here. I'm just going to take the coal grey over that way a little bit. It's better. I'm going to come into this middle bit again with this burnt ochre 10% because there's a peachy patch in here. And around here as well, actually. But it's just a case of building up little bits of colour a bit at a time until you feel that it's blended enough. As long as you've got the colours in the right sort of ballpark, and it doesn't really matter if you didn't even have the right colours, you know, you're just looking for a nice bit of blended fur, something that looks like a reindeer fur at the end of it. I'm just building up those tones gently. bring this nugget down the side. The reindeer have, it's obviously very thick, but it's quite short fur. So we want to keep, if we're using the directional strokes, we want to keep the lines really quite small. We don't want lots of long lines because their fur actually isn't that long, it's just thick. And personally, because it's so sort of blurred out, because it's so diffused and, you know, it's not the main focus, it's not the main part of the picture, personally, I would just not really try and put the direction in because there isn't much there. I would just either keep little circular strokes, or if I'm going to use those directional strokes, just keep them so that you've not really got the pencil lines showing in the paper. That's how I would, and that's how I'm going to tackle this. I'm not going to try and put direction in because I just can't really see it. So I think that's a good place to leave this part of the tutorial here. So we'll leave it there for now. Thanks very much for drawing along with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next part of the tutorial. Thanks very much. Bye for now.